right, perfect. I'd like to welcome everyone out this evening. We're going to have the privilege of swearing in Ms. Teresa Phillips. This previously occurred at our work session meeting, but considering the significant amount of time that she'll be spending on the board, and we just want to recognize her for her devotion and willingness to serve on the board. So, Teresa, with your approbation, I'd like to administer the oath.
Absolutely.
All right, let's just step over here. Thank you. How good is your memory?
Well, you got to give me each line.
Okay, right hand. I, Teresa Phillips,
I, Teresa Phillips,
do solemnly swear that I will faithfully perform
do solemnly swear that I will faithfully perform
the duties of the office of the school director
the duties of the office of the school director
as required by law,
and
will support the Constitution of the United States,
will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Colorado,
the Constitution of the State of Colorado,
and the laws made pursuant thereto.
and the laws made pursuant thereto.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Can I invite the other board members to join us?
Thank you all very much.
And Ms. Phillips, once again, we're very excited to have you on the board.
Thank you.
All right, we'll now move to the public hearing regarding the proposed 2018-2019 school district budget. Ms. Wangaman, would you lead that hearing, please?
Certainly, we'll start out with just a brief overview of the budget, and then we will move forward to the hearing. Here we go. Well, the time's finally arrived to present a proposed budget for the next school year. And you all have been through this, for the most part, in the May meeting. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the adjustments that we've made since the May meeting and going through the budget with a focus on the general fund. The other funds are also detailed in the budget book itself. So as you all know, we got a School Finance Act passed through the legislature on May 9th, 2018. The per pupil revenue at this point is $7,730 for our school district. That is a 6.3% increase over the prior year. So it exceeded inflation, which was 3.4%. There is no immediate impact from para legislation. That was another big piece that we were waiting on. There will be a 0.25% increase July 1st, 2019. So it'll hit next year, and at 0.25%, our estimation is about $38,000. So it's not too big of an increase when it does hit. The enrollment, as Chris stated, in this budget is very conservative. It's at 81 students. We do hold funds for hiring additional teachers, which is our normal course of action, watching students enrolled during the summer. And we also hold on capital projects, making sure that we reach our enrollment goals before we spend the money. Our best estimate, based on Metro Studies data, is that we will grow approximately 200 students. At this point, we are looking at student growth on basically every 2 to 3 week basis. We are already exceeding projections at Lewis Palmer High School. So just a piece of interesting news at this point. This budget contains a 5% average wage increase for staff paid from the salary schedule. The last percentage was spread into the line items since the June update. An average of 7% increase for classified staff, and as we've discussed, a big piece of that is unfreezing the frozen steps. An average increase of 3.2% for administrative staff. As you know, the frozen steps have now been adjusted for all classified and certified or teacher salary paid scheduled employees. Also of note is approximately half the funds necessary to open an additional middle school, because if you all do decide to put a bond on the ballot, we will have to have increased fixed costs associated with the middle school, counselors, nurses, special needs workers, English language learner teachers, administration, janitors, utilities, grounds, and so on. So half of that cost for that additional building in terms of fixed operating costs are built into this budget, $500,000. Budget is balanced. The new piece is starred there from last time. The negative factor is now at 8.66%, which amounts to, I see spelling error there, $4.7 million or $733 per student. You see the history there on below. We do hold adequate table reserves as required by law, and adequate reserve requirements for carryover encumbrances and all board reserve requirements. We do have an extensive year-round process around budgeting. You all know that at this point. This slide just goes through the different pieces and parts that we go through. We've talked through our goals and the trends. 6.3% increase, $7,733 per student. New housing developments are positively impacting our enrollment growth. We continue to monitor new housing trends, talk with developers, and also interact now with Metro Study to get that data. Changes from the last budget you all saw. We reviewed all salaries line item by line item. So double check, make sure we had it, and folks also are resigning and new folks are being hired, of course, constantly. We have spread that additional 1% of salary that we discussed at the May meeting that gave us a positive variance of, negative variance of $1,496. We could not find an assistant director, which was in the last budget, to meet our needs. So instead of that, we've added a dean at each high school to help with some of the workload.
And I just want to reiterate, as you recall, Liz Walhoff got a position as an assistant principal in Academy, and we did not replace her position. Instead, we were going to try to do some cost-saving measures and hire an assistant director. We determined it was better to move forward with more support at the school level, so we added deans at the high school level rather than anything more at the district level.
We added funds estimated for the elementary school prototype and related planning expenditures. Added that to the budget. We added teachers STEAM training for $10,000, and then we added the student security operational system for technology of $25,000. The total added expenditures in this budget versus the May total was $162,000. So now, if you look at this budget, Fund 10, our revenues are basically matched with expenditures. We have a $12,000 positive variance if we exactly hit that budget. That's a brief overview. I'd be happy to answer any questions around that at this point.
Can you define what student security operational system technology is?
Sure. So we're constantly doing work and research in terms of what we can do to make our students safer and to make sure that we have adequate protection around the internet and their writings and so on. We were able to find a piece of software which basically helps us monitor a bit more closely what we're seeing out there and what students are accessing. And so it will give us a step up in terms of how quickly we can respond and what we can do when we have students that maybe are trying to stray where they shouldn't be.
I have a couple of questions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be a bit rhetorical again. Are we pro-growth as a board, as a community? Are we pro-growth? I've asked this early on, and I don't know where we are. I'd like to get a feel.
So I'm just going to clarify something about the hearing itself. So we do have a time for you to discuss in the regular board meeting. But if you have questions, we usually do that here. But if you want to have any sort of board discussion amongst yourselves,
Okay.
since it's hearing,
I'm
it's
sorry.
really just hearing what the public has to say, or respond asking a question about what Cheryl
Oh,
presented.
Sorry. I will
And we
not
probably
be
should have clarified
rhetorical
that.
then.
In a hearing, we're just hearing.
I
You're
have
just
some-
hearing right now.
I have specific questions.
Yeah, and then later on, you'll actually the board will discuss with each other around the budget or with us.
Understood.
Okay,
I'm learning.
that's okay.
See, Teresa, there's several of us
That's
still
probably why
new
you had
here.
the blank look on my face. It really wasn't good.
So-
I thought it was a great question you were asking, Chris.
Chris
The,
always has
the,
great
the
questions.
June 2018 budget that we'll see in September or so, that attendance that's in that number, that document, is as of June 30th of this year or July 1 of this year. Is that correct?
The attendance in the document is as of October 1, student count day.
In the audit?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, let me try again. There's an audit report every year.
Yes,
The attendance that's in that audit report is as of what date?
October 1.
October 1. Okay. Right now, you put 81 in the budget for growth, but yet you have a forecast from this third party that suggests over 200. And that's curious to me. I'm not sure why. And then I'm also really curious about $500,000 of fixed costs for the new middle school when it's not scheduled to open until August of 19. Best case, January of 2020. Worst case, why are we incurring costs before June of 19 of that magnitude?
So 2 questions there. The first one, why the 81 student growth? The administration worked together, talked with each principal to determine what they thought their growth would be. Then we worked with our registrar and looked at what we saw in terms of trends over time to come up with a conservative number to place the budget on. And out of that, the number of 81 students was generated. So that's that question. Second question is, well, why do we have, go ahead.
Just to clarify, we will know that real number on October 1.
That is correct.
Okay,
And we will have,
And then we'll adjust the budget accordingly.
understood.
Administration throughout all the schools didn't want to overproject just in case. They would rather have the issue of more funds than they expected versus having to give money
And
back.
great point. I just wanted to be clear that we are approving a budget that will be updated
Yes,
in
absolutely.
October 1, when we get the actual attendance.
absolutely.
Okay.
Then the other question was, well, wait a minute, we're not going to open this new school next year. Why are we starting to pull operating dollars out for a school that won't be opened? And I think you all may recall the discussion we had in May. We know we're not going to ask the voters for additional dollars to operate this new school. So we have to make sure that we reserve operating dollars in the budget so that we'll have enough money to hire those additional janitors, the additional principals, nurses, the whole scheme, utility costs that it's going to take to open that new school. You don't want to do that all in one year. We don't know what our funding even is going to be from the state for next year. So we're better off taking a conservative approach and stair-stepping those dollars into the budget the best we can. Well, we know that if you all decide to move forward with a possible bond, you all have said, we're looking at 2019 as a possible opening date. So that basically gives us this year, and then next year we're going to have a new school. So we've got to include in our budget operating dollars appropriate so we can absorb it. We had a good year from the state. We were able to meet your board goals, we felt, around compensation and other issues, and put aside half of what we needed. Then we'd have to put the other half aside next year. That being said, we've allocated dollars that are ongoing in our budget. So if we exactly hit our budget, as of June 30th, 2019, we would have $500,000 run down and go into our reserves because it wasn't spent this year. So I'm sorry, probably a long answer to why we have that in there.
That was an excellent answer. I understand, which is good. Last question. So I see these different funds, and I know you were talking primarily about the general fund, but there's this building reserve fund. We don't budget anything for that, correct? That just is purely cash in lieu of or transactions, perhaps?
Yes, what the dollars that comes in that is cash in lieu, which is the dollars pulled when a building permit is pulled, a check comes to us, depending on the entity, towards building a new school or land for a new school.
Okay, and then there's also another one called Capital Projects Fund, which is, if I might call it, deferred maintenance fund or a maintenance fund?
Yes.
Is what
Yes.
it's used as?
Yes, and the other piece that comes out of that is major is school buses.
School buses,
Yes.
right. And I see there that, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, there's an amount that you anticipate that growing by, that fund, and an amount that you anticipate spending, like the school buses, right?
Yes.
That's part of this budgeting process. There is a transfer of that overall money into that fund and a transfer out. And essentially, you're suggesting that this current budget shows it dropping from .38 million down to .35 million during the course of the budget period.
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, now we'll move forward to the public portion of this hearing. Just a friendly reminder to my fellow board members during this process, much like a regular board meeting, we'll just listen to the comments of the public. It's not interactive. Thank you. Apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. Is it Ken Shatton? Shattin. I apologize for mispronouncing that.
Shorty, so sorry. I'm going to piggyback on Mr. Taylor's question here. Are we pro-growth in this district? Because what I've been reading in the Tribune since January of this year has me very concerned that we're not. And so what got me here was a meeting that I had with Cheryl Wangerman about 2 weeks ago. And when I gave her my spiel, she rubbed her arm and she said, I have chills. Please come talk to our community group. And then in that community group, the community group overwhelmingly said, please come here tonight and talk about the budget. So that's why I'm here. I don't know how to move a mic, so if you guys can't hear me, if somebody can help me. But anyway, my spouse and I came to this district in 2005. We were from Colorado Springs, Security, Whitefield Fountain. And I have that shirt on tonight, not to troll you guys and not to say I like District 3 better than I like this district. I grew up in that district. We bought a house in that district. My husband was military, That's why we bought a house in that district. My spouse, myself and my 5 siblings all graduated from that district. In 2002, a postcard came in our mail. It was a lime green postcard, and it said, it was not trademarked, but you got the gist. It was a hamburger, French fries, and a Coke. And it said, for the price of this value meal, you too can have better salaries for your teachers, you can have your schools improved, and you can have growth affected that has been happening for the last several years. District 3 was the only district in the state in 2002 with the help of Mark, oh gosh, I forgot his name, District 20 superintendent right now. Basically, our district, Mark Hatchell, Mr. Hatchell was the only superintendent in the state of Colorado in 2002 to get a mill levy override to pass. Well, in 2005, when we moved here, we just assumed that the people of Monument and LP District 38 were just as giving as the folks in District 3. And when the mill levy override in 2013 failed, we were very discouraged. And we thought, what is going on here? Well, fast forward to 2017, you know, and I'm starting to read in the Tribune, starting in 2018, are we pro-growth? Mr. Taylor asked that. What got me here to the meeting with Cheryl and the community meeting with Superintendent Broff and a lot of people who are sitting in this room was when I read in the Tribune that we are going to, a board was considering repurposing music classes and theater works classes and making them into classrooms. And I literally told my spouse, I'm not going to say it here, but I literally told my spouse, what the F? Why can we not get a mill levy override passed? So I called my sister, who's a district employee. She has her job because in 2012, we all know what happened in Sandy Hook, she is the head security monitor for the district. So I said, give me a name, give me a contact. She got me in touch with Samantha Briggs. She's a community director for District 3, and she spoke to me for an hour on how District 3 got their mill levy override, not in 2002 to pass, but just last year. They passed a mill levy override. And they have the same issues we have in this district. They have a lot of retirees. They have a lot of transients due to the military. But they started a year out before they put their mill levy to the voters, and they started communicating. They didn't just say we need $120 a year. They started telling them why. Why do we need this? And they went to churches. They went to school meetings. They went to just basic meetings where people or seniors met, the senior groups, senior centers. And they gave that why factor over and over and over again to the citizens of Whitefield School District 3. And they weren't convinced it was going to pass. They had a lot of pushback. But when they told them what those funds were going to, I graduated from Whitefield High School. It was built in the 50s. Well, fast forward 60 years into the future, the bleachers are crumbling. The sidewalks are crumbling. And they asked the parents, aren't you tired of sitting bleachers at your kids' football games and those bleachers are falling apart? And they all shook their head and said, yeah, we are tired of that. And so what they did was they kept communicating. They kept asking the teachers what they needed. They kept asking the principals what they needed. And it took them a year, and they finally did a special election, on an off-year election in 2017. They got their mill levy override to pass. And what they got out of that, guys, wasn't just a mill levy override. The staff was asking for a 3% raise. Mrs. Wagaman just told us that the staff here is getting 5%. My sister, who's a staff employee, knows several teachers. All they were asking for was 3%. Effective July 1, next week and a half away, all the district employees, all the teachers in that district, get this, will get an 8% salary increase. Not 3, not 5, 8. That's what that mill levy override did. It also, there was about 6 schools left that didn't have security cameras. That mill levy override gave those schools, and as of this summer, they're putting their security systems in, and those schools will be up to compliance of the district as well.
Ma'am, you have about 30 seconds left.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to, you know, the schools that all got that mill levy override, they have a remodel budget. The parents have to go, they're encouraged to go to the meetings. They're not just told, hey, you know, come and show up and we're going to tell you what we're doing. They're encouraged to say, this is what your mill levy override did. This is where your funds are going. My spouse and I, we spend about $120 a year on Amazon Prime, and I said this in our community meeting. If we could put a postcard in the mail that says, for $120 a year, your Amazon Prime membership, 2 visits to Starbucks, and however many times you go to McDonald's in a month, for that same price a month, we could give our teachers salary increases. We can do a mill levy override. If we have cell phones in our pockets, if our kids have cell phones in our pockets, we too can put together a mill levy override and keep communicating it to this board, to the community, to teachers, to principals. Get a wish list from our principals and say, what do you guys need? And we just have to keep communicating it. If we just tell people it's a tax, they're going to turn it down.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Larry McVoy.
Thank you. Mr. Lawson, I have to plead. I'm a rookie talking to school boards. I've done it a lot, but not since I was about 13 years old. So how much time do I have?
Well, we typically allow 3 minutes, but considering there was only 2 of you and I did not read the portion of our policy.
So 4 or 5 hours, I'm good.
Just under.
Yeah, okay.
I gave Kim right around 6 minutes and 5 seconds.
Okay, I appreciate it. My wife and I, our family, have been in the area here the last 10 years, had a great experience in District 20 and moved here 3 years ago. I've had great experiences here as well and want to appreciate what you guys do as well as the administration, teachers in the school, and frankly the kids. It's been a great community for us. Like I said, I don't typically follow the school board deliberations a whole lot. We follow the agendas, et cetera. I'm here tonight just a couple of questions which I realize are rhetorical and not meant to engage you in any give and take. And they concern the added security that we saw show up in the agenda in, I think, April. Want to just, I guess, validate our family's concern and those of our immediate family community about the priority of school security for our kids as we all deal with bluntly tragic circumstances around the country that seem to keep befuddling our ability to stop them, despite the fact that we keep coming up with plans. So also in this era of identity politics, I want to mention a little bit about my background, because there's been a raging conversation about this topic of how you all choose to deal with security on our next door neighbors' social media apps and in grocery stores and things like this. And I wish to acknowledge that there are people that think a gun in every hand is the best way to do it, and others who think peace and kumbaya and guns are evil is the way to do it. So I just want to set that aside and say, as an individual, I'm an emergency physician. I spent my career taking care of people who have been victims of violence, interpersonal violence with fists, guns, knives, bats, the whole bit, and the circumstances that lead them to those situations. I also, being in the healthcare industry, have had to deal at the leadership level of metal detectors and bulletproof glass and armed security and all those kind of things. Personally, grew up with guns literally under the bed, so I'm not a guy that worries about guns being evil. The questions I put before you that I think would help the community as I listen to the conversation going on is, have you actually decided to delegate something to the security officer or the head of security to come back to you to deliberate, or has that decision already been made? And then further, if the decision is made or the options are entertained to have unidentified armed security unknown to the kids and the families, anyone else, and not marked like traditional security guards is a path you choose to go, I'd ask that a full vetting of the data, the perspectives, et cetera, be something that we all consider as a community given the high risk and the stakes involved. I'll conclude my comments by saying that at our dinner table last week, we had a bunch of our son, who's a junior at PR, coming around the table, 9, 10 boys. They're largely from military families, from hunting families. They had no idea that this was on the table, had quite a bit of concern, and were remarkably free, I think, of some of the political food fighting that goes on around this issue, and I think we're asking some really good questions. So I guess one thing I'd ask also is, how will we include the staff of the school, the kids, and the community in what is clearly a critical decision for how we choose to protect our schools and our kids and really create a community where violence is not an acceptable option for anybody and isn't something that can create the kind of impacts we see all over. I am done. Thank you for the time, and we'll be in close touch with this issue. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes the public hearing regarding the proposed 2018-19 school district budget. We will now move into our formal school board meeting. Ms. Wood, would you take the roll call, please? Here?
Here.
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 To view this meeting's presentation documents, please access Board Docs. The link to the Board Docs website can be found via the D38 website, www.lewispalmer.org, on the Board of Education meetings webpage. Do we have any Boy Scouts with us tonight? What? Do we have any Girl Scouts with us tonight?
They're probably all out camping.
All right. All right, I'll go ahead and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Under public comment guidelines, per board policy BEDH, public participation at school board meetings, there is one time for public comment, and it is limited to 30 minutes. In an effort to allow all who wish to speak, the amount of time dedicated to each speaker will be dependent upon the number of people who sign up, with the entire comment period not exceeding 30 minutes. If 10 people or less sign up, each person will have 3 minutes to address the board. The sign-up sheet for public comments will be available at 5 p.m. in the Learning Center meeting room. All speakers will be asked to limit their remarks to the time allotted on the total number of speakers, not to exceed 3 minutes per person. If a group of people have similar concerns, the board requests that a spokesman for the group be selected. The board respects the rights of the public to speak on matters concerning the operation of the schools. We believe that the public comments that are critical to district staff, however, often cause unnecessary harm to those employees and to the education of our students. As a result, we prefer that members of the public share any criticisms of employees in writing with the superintendent, who is responsible for supervising all staff, then involving the board as necessary. If you choose to address a personnel issue publicly, please understand the board does not endorse the comments and of any speaker, and reminds all who speak that they assume the risk of legal action by the district employee in the event the affected employee believes that the comment about them violate legal standards. Lastly, keep in mind we have K-12 students in the audience. Please keep all comments appropriate for the audience. All right, I would like to make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So, your
Second.
Second, okay. Any questions, comments, concerns? Ms. Wood? Mr. Clausen? Aye.
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 All right. Now we'll move on to the public comments portion of our meeting. Thank you. Amy Schwarzer will be the first one to speak.
Hi, I'm Amy Schwarzer, a Bear Creek parent, and I've made comments the last several meetings about the bond issue, and I wanted to make one last one because I know there's a big vote tonight. And from the earlier discussions, it kind of sounds like 2 schools now is not really still on the table, but I just want to point out, and I don't want to lose sight of the fact that solving the problem of our overcrowded middle school by just opening one 650-seat elementary school that's immediately going to be overcrowded the day it opens is not really an ideal solution. And by moving forward with that, you risk losing the confidence and trust of the parents and students who you serve. A lot of those students are going to have to be reboundaried, or fifth graders in middle school, or a lot of solutions that have not sounded very palatable to a lot of the community in the few discussions that have happened over the last several months. So I just want to ask that you keep that in mind when you make your vote, and if you do vote to proceed with one school now, I think that you need to couple that with a solid plan of what the next steps are that will help gain the trust of those parents and students who are concerned about what the school district will look like in the next couple of years if we just open one school now or put one school on the bond now. And also to gain the trust of the voters, who we are very likely going to have to come back to in 15 to 18 months, as Mr. Taylor pointed out, to ask for money for yet a second school. And if we don't start preparing them now, we risk having a lot of problems down the road with that. So I just ask that you please let your plans be known, keep the trust of the parents, students that you serve, and make the best decision for moving forward. Thank you.
Kim Shatim.
What came out of the 2017 mill levy override, and I wish we wouldn't call them that. I wish school districts would call them a mill levy continuance, because about every 20 years, as communities grow, you're going to have to continually ask your constituents for more funding. And that's what happened. There was a 15-year 15-year between 2002 and 2017. District 3 had the same problems we do. They had a lot of growth. And so what they did was they passed their bonds. As of 2019, they have a brand new school opening up because of that bond increase. And they took their bonds to market when the tax bill passed in Congress last year. They were advised by Standard & Poor's and Barclays and various funding agencies of how to time their bond. Initially, they went to their constituents. They got about $49 million. And because they timed their bonds in a specific way, they didn't take them to market in 2017. They took them to market in January of 2018. They got an additional $7 million. So that school, they have a new K through 12 school opening up. It's called a technology school. And that technology school is going to be opening up for K through 8 grades in Lawson Ranch, which is a Whitefield subdivision, and it opens up in 2019. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Derek Arahe.
I noticed that you just got your survey results today, and Karen pointed out that 52% have been here for, somebody pointed out that they've been here for 5 years or less. That means that there's still 50% of the people that remember when you passed the school for Palmer Ridge, and then shortly thereafter had to shut down schools because you built too soon. I just want to remind everybody that things are cyclical, and they don't ring a bell at the top. There isn't a bell that rings and says, oh, this is the top of the housing market, the building is stopping today. You know, it's not till 2-3 years later that you know. So if you overbuild now and end up having a similar problem that you had in the past, it's not going to be good. There's no reason to build 2 schools now. It's purely silly. Build the one you need, and if in another year you need another school, the community will know and they'll pass it. But if you ask for 2 schools, you risk getting nothing. So if you ask for too much, you know, expect to perhaps deal with nothing. Thank you.
Jackie Burhans.
Hi, I'm Jackie Burhans. So at your May 31st meeting, you passed a preliminary budget, or however you did that, so that security could get started on hiring people. And that, of course, generated a lot of discussion on social media. I was very happy to be able to call and speak to Dennis Coates to find out exactly what was happening, because as it turns out, the internet does not always get it right. And I got a lot of my questions answered, but I think there are still a lot of questions and concerns in the community about it, and misconceptions about what's being done now and what thoughts there are in the future and what kind of input we could give. So I would like to second the gentleman's thought to maybe meet with the community, set up some kind of a meeting, so that we can ask questions and get the answers that you're able to give us. We understand that when it comes to security, you can't give every single detail because that's too much, but I think there's plenty that we could discuss that would make people feel a lot more comfortable with what I see as a very balanced approach to this. Thank you.
All right, that concludes the public's comment portion of our meeting. We'll now proceed with board comments. Mr. Taylor, may we start with you?
Thanks, Mark, for moving.
Oh, I'll go back if you want.
I actually will defer. I have plenty to talk about in our agenda, so I'm going to pass.
Ms. Phillips?
Thank you. I'm not going to pass. Put my screen down, though. I know some here tonight know me, and many others do not. So I'd like to just say a few words, if I could, for a couple minutes. I'm happy to be on the board and to have an opportunity to affect positive change for our nearly 7,000 students and the teachers in our district. One of the board's education goals is to, and I paraphrase, lead through policy that will provide world-class education for our students in a safe and secure environment. This is our big picture, and I think that summarizes our intent as a whole community, and as for me, as one board member, and as a parent. As our district continues to grow, it will be important for each of us, and for all of us as a whole on this board, to know the why of what we are doing, to relate our decisions to the relevant data, and to always include parent engagement and teacher and administrative input. I intend to continue to be an engaged member of our community and an interactive member of this board. I've already, in the last 2 weeks, had the opportunity to interact and have really good discussions with each of the board members here, as well as our superintendent and assistant superintendent. I'm optimistic about our future, about the entire future of our district and for our children. I look forward to the work ahead, and it does seem to be a bit of work. I'd like to thank the board members and for all of you for giving me this opportunity to serve our community and, most importantly, the children and our students in our district. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Mr. Poff?
I think the only thing I'm going to say is welcome, Teresa, to the board. You're going to regret it. And that's it. We have a lot to work out tonight, so I don't want to take any more time.
Okay. Ms. Upchurch?
I also wanted to say thank you, Teresa, that I've enjoyed our conversations, and I think you're going to be a positive asset to the board as we move forward.
Thank you.
So thank you for joining us. I also wanted to point out that we're looking at putting together our board socials, our school board socials, and I came up with the idea to do a back-to-school breakfast with the board, so we need to discuss at some point prior to that some dates. Also to let you guys know that we are still collaborating on our preschool possibilities, and I've really enjoyed that collaboration with Cheryl and Julie. And at some point, we can share some of our analysis at an upcoming meeting when we're not jam-packed. I met also with, sat and had lunch with Cheryl and Anne-Marie, and I wanted to thank Anne-Marie for all of her service that she gave to DAC, and Susan Hunter-Smith, who's our incoming co-chair. And hopefully we can put together and collaborate with the DAC and do some forums. If we put a bond on the ballot, we're going to need to do a lot of town halls and a lot of forums, and what we did last year was a really good format, so I would hope that we could collaborate and do that together. And everything else, I'm just going to let it go and say thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Upchurch. I concur with the statements that have been made. Ms. Phillips, we're very excited to have you as part of the board. You're well-educated, you're a mother of a couple kids, and you're married to a very bright man, and I think it's a wonderful combination. It's a wonderful combination to be a successful board member, so thank you again for throwing your name in the hat and your willingness to serve.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to the next agenda item, consider approve adoption of...
Do you want me to do my update?
Yeah.
I think he's trying to give you a hint, Karen. Go ahead.
All right, let me start my stop.
Well, actually, what I want to talk about is sort of relevant to several people's comments, so I think it's important that I at least address it. So just wanted to clarify some things, that the information that's been flying around regarding armed staff, because I know it is concerning people on multiple sides of the perspective of the issue. So I wanted to clarify, because some things that have been said may be one person's opinion, and it's important that, and this comes from Dennis Coates, I want to make sure that we are getting the accurate information as it comes from our head of security versus one individual's opinion of what might be happening, or multiple people's opinion as it seems to be. So armed staff, as of today, Dennis Coates is our only armed staff member. So any questions out there that we've been secretly arming staff without telling people about it is absolutely not true. Anyone that we would add to that list won't have classroom responsibilities or supervision responsibility for specific groups of individuals, i.e. a bus driver. We take very seriously the idea of arming. If we are going to arm staff, they have to be free to do that work of protecting without being responsible for supervising a group of students. Gun-free zones are still in effect. It's a law. So our new signs that we'll put up just warning people that we may have additional staff that are armed don't replace the gun-free zone signs. They're companions to the gun-free zone signs, because that is a law. We have to maintain gun-free zones for anyone who is not an employee and anyone who has not been vetted to be an employee who is armed. And that's very important, because the vetting that would go into this is very specific in the case of our district. There's insurance guidelines we have to follow. And it specifies a level of training and a level of background and experience that the average person doesn't just have. And so the concern that people have that anybody that wants to will be able to carry a weapon is completely inaccurate, because we would not do that. That would be unwise from a security standpoint. We plan to double the expectations and training requirements beyond what is expected of our insurance carrier. We will only allow individuals who have a background in either law enforcement or military and significant training to carry a weapon. People will not be carrying, and we're not talking about massive quantities of people. We won't be carrying no one will be carrying a weapon outside, visible in a way that would alarm small children or even other individuals. It would be sheerly a protective measure in the case of an emergency. And it is important that we maintain the anonymity of those individuals, because it is a security issue. Again, it's not a large quantity of people. It's just enough to provide an additional level of support should it be needed. Not only that, but every individual that would be selected to do this would have to go through extensive safety training, emergency response training, active shooter training. The level of training that is expected of this individual would ensure that that weapon would never be used indiscriminately. And that's really important, because I think that there's a misnomer out there that people are going to be able to do this with a 2-hour concealed carry course, and they may not be able to make that decision when they need to. And that is absolutely not the case. Additionally, I just want to reiterate that the majority of what we're looking for in terms of armed individuals, employees, and again, it's employees, we can't allow volunteers to enter our premises because it's a gun-free zone unless you're an employee that has been vetted and gone through the training process to carry. So I think it's important to note that in this case, we have to consider weighing not only protection of our students, but protection of everyone that's in that building. And we don't take this lightly, and that's why I'm concerned with some of the rhetoric that's happening around this, because this is not, well, I agree we need to get community feedback with regard to what we should or shouldn't do with regard to security, and we have sought to do that. Ultimately, who is going to be responsible should something happen on one of our campuses? That's my question. It may not be the person who gave the opinion about whatever. We have to make the decision based on best practices, based on law enforcement guidance, and we will be doing this based on the guidance from law enforcement personnel. It will be based on insurance protocols, training protocols. That's why we're only looking at highly trained individuals who have a background in this area. So it's just really important that we recognize that we make security decisions based on what are considered best practices. And we sometimes have to make decisions that not everybody knows about it. It's not because we're trying to keep it from anyone, it's because we have to ultimately protect every single one of those kids that walks through the door. And I just want to reiterate that we don't take this lightly. And I'm a little disturbed by where this conversation went without really taking time to consider what it is that the heavy weight we have that we put on ourselves every single day to protect every single kid in this district. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Karen. Cheryl?
I think I'll let those comments sit and reserve my comments for the August meeting.
Okay, thank you. All right, next agenda item. Consider approve the adoption and appropriation of the school district budget for fiscal year 2018-19 and related resolutions. Ms. Wangeman, this is a continuation of the work session meeting that we had. Mr. Boff?
I'd like to make a motion, if I could do, is that all right? I'm not sure how I'm going to transition this because it's not set up like a motion, but I'll try.
Hang on, Mr. Poff, there's two motions on the back.
I'm going to do the first one,
Okay, thank you, sir.
and then we can decide what to do, and then maybe I'll read the second one.
Okay, that's fair.
I'd like to make a motion, be it resolved by the Board of Education of Lewis Palmer, School District Number 38 in El Paso County, State of Colorado, in accordance with CRS 22-44-105, that the 2018-2019 annual budget be adopted, and that the amount shown in the resolution attached to the minutes of this meeting be appropriated to each fund as specified in the adopted budget for the ensuing fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2018 and ending June 30th, 2019.
I'll second the motion. Questions, comments, concerns?
Is it okay now, Karen?
Yes. Yes, this is your time to discuss.
All right, thank you. So, we have, according to information that's been displayed over time here, close to, what, $100 million of deferred maintenance? Is that in the ballpark?
Based on what was identified by RTA, I think it was 50 million all told, if you looked at
50?
everything that needed to be
Okay, so not 100, 50.
fixed.
Sorry. So 50 million of deferred maintenance. And I would like to have us consider what that means. That means that over the last number of years, we've deferred maintenance on our facilities. And the question that I would like to be considered here is that the path forward, that we just go ahead and defer maintenance and, you know, have a balanced budget cash flow wise, but we defer maintenance and then go to the taxpayers for a bond or an MLO to cover the deferred maintenance? Because that's a lot of money, $50 million of deferred maintenance that I'm assuming has grown over time. And I only see in this current budget about 1.26 million budgeted for maintenance. 1.26 million out of a deferral of 50 million. I'm having a hard time reconciling in my mind the responsibility associated with that.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Taylor?
Please.
With your professional background and your thorough review and analysis of the budget, how would you suggest we tackle it?
Well, if you've got $7,500 per student,
Sure.
and you have to live within the budget, because you do, then how is that 7,500 split up? What's the percentage that goes to the various pieces of the budget?
Sure.
And are we prepared as a board to approve a budget that continually takes us in the hole with, I am assuming, the only out is a bond or an MLO? Now, do I think that's the right approach? I do not.
Okay.
I think we live within a budget. That's what I believe. I don't believe that this current budget has enough allocated to deferred maintenance issues as it should.
That's fair.
So how would we handle it? We'd live within the budget and we'd start addressing it as in this budget. We're not going to fix all 50 million in 1 year, obviously, but 1.26 million isn't even making a dent. In fact, we continue to regress.
Thank you.
What do we cut?
Karen, you are the chief
Well,
CEO here.
I-
I'm assuming this is your budget.
I'm going to tell you why it's a challenge, and that is because 80% of our budget is dedicated to salaries and benefits for our employees. We are a employee-rich environment. And so in order to give raises to our teachers, in order to make sure that there's costs, there's trade-offs. And so knowing that it's salaries, it's class sizes, it's all those things that we have to balance against. And that's the problem with what we went through with the recession, what we've gone through with the implementation of the negative, now the budget stabilization factor, is that we have lost revenue, and where do you cut it from? And it's difficult to cut that from the 80% of our budget that goes to salaries and benefits.
Well, and in fact, Mark was a part of that process and fortunately got past it, at least to square zero. He didn't really get past it, but they tried to fix what they did. So let me just, I'm going to feed off of this news story about the comparison of Douglas County and El Paso County. And that news story went something along the lines of, in Douglas County, there's one school district with one administration. In El Paso County, there's some teens, I'm not sure exactly, I'll say 14. 14 or so school districts with administration. So a way, if I were put my business hat on, I would say, well, is there a way we could maybe have a shared service center within El Paso County that would help each school district reduce some of that overhead cost of administration through a shared service center concept? It's just an idea, and I'm not saying I'm for or against it, but you ask, what would I do? Well, I would try and find ways, because I don't want to take it away from teachers. I want to make that really clear. I'm not here to cut teacher salary. If anything, they're underpaid. I believe that with all my heart. So then what else can we do? We can pass a bond. We can go to the taxpayers and say, we've got this issue. It's grown over time. Let's be really honest and just say, You know, our facilities, our community has underfunded education for a period of years to the tune of $50 million. And go to the community and ask them to help fix it. Just be really upfront about what it is, right? That's an option. Another option is there a possibility, and I bring this up because Dr. Benton in a, what's the committee?
PICTAC.
Yeah.
PICTAC? She shared something that they're doing in technology where there is this collaboration amongst the school districts relative to, you know, working with colleges or working with various programs to help students have opportunities for internships or technology opportunities, et cetera. That's a really cool program. And so the concept is not new, it's just not being used in the administration. It's being used in the education model. And I think quite successfully, as I understand it. So again, I'm not sitting here articulating what we should do. I'm just saying, answering the question, what could we do? And the options in my mind is, what can we do to find the efficiencies in the administration of this school district that would free up funds for teachers and address deferred maintenance that exists? Well, that's one option. There's another option, is let's put a bond out there. Let's put an MLO out. I mean, how long do we kick this can down the road? I don't know what the answer is, but I want us to consider it. I want us to be open and forthright, and perhaps we need to have some community deliberates meetings about it, but it just really is unsettling to me when I hear about 50 million of deferred maintenance. And we're trying to sneak a little bit into the bond to build this building and take care of a little bit of it. But if we're going to do it, let's just be more open and honest about it, in my opinion. That's all. So it's not entirely rhetorical, but I'm trying to express some of the frustrations I have with this budget. And I'm not blaming anyone here. I hope you appreciate that. I'm just looking at the big picture and saying, there's something not working.
Well, I try to remember back when I first came on the board, and I believe the deferred maintenance was pretty close to 50 million back then.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that it's really skyrocketed, but I think the term hold your own. You know, they say a lot of times when you're in a big battle, you kind of shoot the targets that are real close, and we've just never had an opportunity to start shooting some of these a little bit further away. I would venture to say, Cheryl, we are not alone in our deferred maintenance concerns.
That is true. As a matter of fact, our TA came back and said we were a little above average in terms of our buildings in general for their age are in a little bit better shape than the average district. It's a problem, not to disagree at all with what Mr. Taylor said, but yes, it's a problem all 178 school districts face.
And when I first, again, years ago, the state mandated that a certain percentage of your budget had to go into capital maintenance. So they kind of forced you into doing this, but during the recession, they took all that away and said, you know, every man for himself kind of, you know, philosophy. It has been a challenge. I'm more than happy to address it, but, you know, I'm kind of like one of those, you know, fiscal conservative people. It's like, if we're going to address this, something else has to be cut. And Karen's at, I mean, 85% of our budget is basically salaries. And so it's kind of like with the federal government, you know, entitlements are this big chunk that you can't touch. And I'm surely not going to ask teachers, I think we just now have kind of caught up a little bit with that, with their salaries. I'm perplexed from the standpoint of, I absolutely agree with you. I think the right thing to do is to put it all out there and ask the community to step up and see if we can add. I'm just not sure that would pass. But I'm not willing to roll that into like one bond covers it all. I think that's not appropriate. I think the community should have, you know, this is for this, this is for this, this is for this. You decide your values as a voter, what can you support? And if they say no, then we are their administrators of their will.
And in D20's bond from, was it last year?
They've had multiple
But they
bonds
passed a
and MLOs.
$220 million one, I believe it was last year. 2016?
Yeah,
2 years ago.
so
That did address deferred maintenance. They put it right out there, and so it's not unknown for that to happen.
and I personally would suggest that we pick the time, the year that we pay off Prairie Winds and Creekside Middle School. I'm already going to start calling it that. If you pick that year, one of the things District 20 pulled a few years back is they said, you know, they passed an MLO and said no new taxes because they converted bonds that were going to expire into an MLO. So all their taxpayers said, well, why wouldn't I do this? Our taxes aren't going to go up and I'm going to support our schools. So I think we should be prepared years ahead of when that happens. I think it's 2024 and just say, hey, we want to convert all this into a bond or an MLO. I would suggest an MLO to address these capital maintenance issues. And then that would, but again, we have to make it 6 more years to get to that point.
You know, Chris, I concur with your position. My only concern is timing.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't argue that at all. I felt like we need to talk about it because I think it's painfully obvious when you look at the numbers and you sit and you kind of go through all the noise and you come to the conclusion that we're under budgeting our facilities. And if it's still 50 million from 12 years ago, you know, my point is that I just don't think we should ignore it. And so I agree with Mark, the timing is absolutely crucial. But it is something that I'm not trying to say we ignore, and I don't know that we'd want to do that bond this year, but I do think we have to be prepared to address it in the next coming time, because there are schools, I suspect, within D38 that have critical deferred maintenance issues, and it's only going to get worse in time. So timing is everything, I agree.
Can I ask, this could be a trick question, Cheryl, so I apologize. Can we actually put an MLO out that doesn't start for 6 years?
I'd like to defer to bond counsel for that.
I know it's a tricky question,
And I would
so.
also state that then this board would be, in some ways,
Obligating, that most likely would be the downfall of that. Because it'd be great to ask the voters, hey, how about in 6 years from now, you know, we won't raise your taxes, but you commit to do this. And then we could start borrowing some money for the real critical needs based on that. But never mind.
And Karen, for your consideration, you know, as we prepare for the next round, we really should look at it, some sort of phased approach or something that really can bring that to the table, because this operating budget isn't sufficient to even nick and dime it. It's just not touching it. So we got 2 budgets here. We got a capital budget, and we're going to propose a bond for that capital budget. But we have this operating budget that's not addressing it. So it's not being addressed, and that's not okay. So we just need to make sure that we have, I think, communication, timing, all of those things come together that, you know, it's got to be a part of the next process.
Absolutely, and so here's the challenge is that it's the same thing that we have with our state budget. We're all fighting over pieces of the pie, and the problem is the pie's not adequate. And so everything is a trade-off every single year. It's like, do you want to make sure you have the most qualified, you know, staff in front of the kids, the most qualified, you know, individuals driving our students around in buses? Do we want to make, we're barely keeping up in some of those areas with regard to being able to keep people, employees in our district in some of those areas. And because, and there isn't necessarily the cost savings in consolidating that some people think, because what happens is you just get, there's more that you have to address, and so then you end up with more staff to address those things. Districts that pass bonds and MLOs over and over and over again, if you look at their, and you talk about reducing the administrative, and I'm assuming you mean administrative everything, like the number of payroll clerks you have and those kinds of things. So administrative costs is what you're talking about. As you grow, it's difficult to reduce those because obviously they're dealing with larger volume of employees or whatever they might be dealing with. And if you look at many of our surrounding districts, they're operating on a 2% administration cost, and we're operating on a 1%. So I'm not sure where else you cut to make that happen without people going unpaid, without, and so you can consolidate some things, and we are doing some of those things. We work within a BOCES to share special education support, for instance. In the BOCES, we have an opportunity to share more things that support relationships among districts to work together. But here's another interesting factor. The bigger that your district gets, the less likely you are to participate in those things. So when we get together as a group of superintendents for the Pikes Peak area and we try to work on a collaborative model, we're trying to work on something right now to deal with expelled, suspended students that we're required to educate, as well as students who are at risk for dropping out. We can't get any of the big districts to compete because they're like, oh, we already have our own department and we're handling that. And so it makes it more difficult for the rest of us with smaller districts to collaborate and work together because 20 doesn't want to have anything to do with it, 11 doesn't want to have anything to do with it, 49 doesn't want to have anything to do with it. And so it's a constant push-pull challenge because as you get bigger, you feel like you don't need to necessarily collaborate and work with those around you. It's a problem of the smaller districts to try to figure out ways to collaborate and work together and save and have those cost efficiencies. And anytime we can, we try to accomplish that, but it does become challenging from that standpoint. But doesn't mean we shouldn't stop looking at it. I agree with you. If there's a way for us to pull it off, let's figure it out. But we do continue to have some of those problems, especially in our region where we don't have one district for the entire county. And now we're going against a tradition of what's been there before in terms of local control. And how do you change that and try to work together when it's, no, this is what we do here, and we want to keep doing our thing here. So it's a good rhetorical question.
It's a wicked problem, isn't it?
It is a wicked problem.
Well, one of the things that just drives me crazy is when I hear, again, out on social media and stuff, where people are like, well, if District 38 would just cut from the big red administration, we could take all that money and get it down to the schools. Well, let me tell you a little fact here. When I first came on the school board, and Cheryl can back me up on this, I think we had 8 or 9 administrators, maybe more.
Yeah, I think we were up to
working
12.
up to 12. That's what I didn't want to use that.
Administrators, as I recall.
So we had 12 administrators in Big Red for a district probably 80% of the size of what we have now. So we had 12. If my math is right, we have 5. Is that correct? And we're handling 30 to 40% more kids. And we just, again, in this current budget, we cut an administrator to allow for funding for people, or for staff down in the schools. So we continue, even now, when, it's supposed to be times are good now. And yet we're still, I just see such a conscious effort of this administration to get the resources down. But when I hear people say that, well, we just need to cut the administrators, we have so many, my head wants to explode because we do not have that problem here. And someone who makes that statement does not know what they're talking about, period. This district has been committed to the kids from the beginning, and I just want to say again, the administrators took approximately half the pay increase that the teachers got, and no one's saying thank you. Well, I want to say thank you to our administrators for doing that. I appreciate that. That it doesn't save a lot of money, I'll be honest with you, but it just shows that our administrators are focused on the kids and the teachers. So that's one of those things that kind of just drives me crazy, and maybe it's been 10 years in the coming. But this administration, we do not have a fat administration in this district at all.
Thank you, Mr. Poff. Ms. Upchurch?
I appreciate that we have focused on increasing the staff pay for our teachers and for classified staff, and that we've made the adjustments for the frozen steps. I'm thrilled, and I'm so appreciative that we've done that, and indeed that our administrators are reducing what they could get. So from the past. So I do appreciate that, and I'm curious if, as we're moving forward, there's been some, with new opportunities that have come down, we can possibly look at, it will not make a dent in the 50 million, but there are grants that are becoming available online now that are new that weren't available before. So we have, now that while we're looking at this going forward, can't we look at that? And B, do we currently put aside how we're doing with the potential middle school, put aside money as we're going forward? For example, we're about to have to re-turf at Palmer Ridge High School. So we know that turf has a life expectancy. Are we starting to save now for when that life expectancy comes due so that we can address that capital need at that point?
So we don't save, if you will, out of the budget, but we take our capital projects and we have them in this software program called School Dude. And we have them determined by year as to what will fail or what needs to be replaced by year. So we know where we have our peaks and valleys, if you will, and then plan around that to try to get a consistent flow of deferred maintenance budget, if you will, a capital reserve budget every year. Because we're 85% salaries and bennies, the capital reserve fund can't take more money one year and then less money the next, because our salaries and benefits have to be paid every year. So that budget has to be fairly smooth as well. Does that make sense?
So we're not necessarily saving per se, but we know in the back of our minds how much it's going to cost to re-turf something, and we're keeping that in mind as we budget out our capital needs each year. Because we know the priority for when things will probably fail.
And yet we're still $50 million.
Yeah.
There's a motion on the floor. Before we take a vote, are there any other questions, comments, concerns?
I have another comment, if I might.
Absolutely.
You know, my wife and I sent our kids off to camp and got to go to a couple movies, which is rare with kids. But anyway, you know, I see sometimes that we advertise about D38 and movie theaters, and I know we're not talking a lot of money here, but that originally was why I asked this rhetorical question. Are we pro-growth? You know, from my perspective, as one board member and as a father and a taxpayer in the school district, you know, I would rather have us understand the opt-in, opt-out questions, and I'd rather have a waiting line for our school district because we're so dang good than advertise. It just, yeah, it doesn't affect the bottom line one way or the other, but that's just my view. And so, you know, how does that really help us achieve our framework goals?
For us, it's not just advertising. It's also pride in branding our district and having pride in our district. And because it doesn't cost a lot of money, we feel like it's an opportunity to say, hey, we're a great district and we're proud of that. So, and you may see it as recruiting. That may not always be what we're trying to accomplish. And certainly we could stop doing all of that stuff. But at the same time, I can tell you a teacher will come up to me and say, I saw that ad come up in the movie theater and it made me really proud to be a part of it. It reminded me how much pride I have in being a part of D38. Or we have a teacher, prospective teacher, that says, hey, I saw that ad and I really want to come work for this district. So there's
I appreciate
a
that.
pro and con to
There's
that.
probably a 51-49 split.
Yeah.
I get it, and that's just my view. The last comment I want to make about the budget is this whole concept that, you know, the burden, the payroll burden is like close to 30% or more of salary. Is that right, roughly?
Are you thinking about the
The school district's cost to pay benefits,
Oh,
para, health insurance, et cetera.
yeah, it's probably close to about 23-24%. Actually, we have a slide on that. Hang on. Let me find that chart.
Would you like to take about 5 minutes and solve para?
No,
I'll
but
give 'em
I
10
just, I have a statement to make about para, though. It's probably the best retirement plan in the world.
Well, it used to be.
Well, it's still awfully good as you
Yeah,
compare
it
it to
is-
anybody in private
It
sector.
is good, but I think sometimes people forget too that, you're absolutely right, I'm not saying it's not, but sometimes people think that people are getting para and Social Security. If you get
I-
rid of para, you won't get any those people won't get any Social Security. So
But
you do
that's-
need some element of, yeah.
That deflects my point.
Yeah.
My point is, it's a Cadillac of retirement plans. Even if it's not as good as it was a few years ago, it's still one of the very best that exist. And I just want to remind our teachers that that's one reason they
Yeah.
teach. It's not just the take-home pay every 2 weeks.
You're correct about that, and I would say that I think the challenging part, sometimes teachers see that there's other sectors that are getting that para-retirement that are getting compensated significantly more and getting a similar
I
compensation
appreciate
package,
the
so,
fact that there's competition. In
Yeah.
fact, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But I'm just pointing out that, you know, it's a healthy comp plan when you look at it in its whole.
Yeah, 28.6, so yeah.
I thought it was closer.
And there are things that our community we can still, as individuals, as our community members, as school board members, to collaborate with each other and take care of our schools and our students. The transition students still need a kitchen. That's a $9,000 cost that we still have Adopt D38 programs out there. And families can absolutely help to take care of our school district as well.
Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome, Mr. Taylor. Any other discussion? All right, Ms. Wood?
Mr. Clausen?
Aye.
Mr. Pop?
Aye.
Ms. Phillips?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Nay.
Ms. Upchurch?
No.
Okay. Moving on to the next item, review of public survey results.
I don't think we're
We have two
finished.
motions.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Poff, thank you. Would you like to make a motion, Mr. Poff?
Sure. I'd like to make a motion, be it resolved that the Board of Education of Lewis Palmer School District 38 authorizes the superintendent or her designee to borrow available unencumbered cash balances in the capital reserve, insurance reserve, building reserve, and nutritional service food fund in accordance with CRS 2244-113 to be used to fund short-term cash needs of the district during fiscal year 2018 and 19, and be it further resolved that funding for incomplete capital reserve fund projects be carried forward to fiscal year 2018 and 19, and a portion of the insurance reserve, nutritional service, and transportation funds be used for one-time expenditures related to capital equipment purchases and to intentionally reduce fund balances.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Cheryl, do you want to expand on this a little bit?
Because that was going to be my next question.
Sure, I could tell by the look on Tiffany's face. So, two pieces on this. The first piece is that we receive our property taxes at the end of the year. So our cash flow is cyclical until those property taxes start coming in towards the end of our fiscal year, which, as you know, ends June 30th. So when we get to December, January, and February, we have the need to borrow funds from these other funds, which other funds such as the food service fund and so on, which are then paid back by year end. because otherwise we would run out of cash, if you will. But by year end, we're back to zero because we get those, or back to positive cash flow because we get those property taxes. So that's the first piece. The second piece, by law, anytime you reduce fund balance, the board needs to pass a resolution saying that is an okay thing to do. So you would ask, well, why would you reduce fund balance? Well, for a number of reasons. In the insurance reserve and the transportation fund, capital reserve fund, for example, we always want to keep those balances fairly low and leave the dollars in the general fund. Because from the general fund, funds can move to any other fund, but once dollars are transferred into one of these other funds, such as cap reserve or so on, they need to stay in that fund until they're spent. So you have maximum flexibility by leaving your dollars in the general fund. On the food service or nutrition fund, we are required by federal law to keep those balances at a certain amount, not to get too much of a fund balance in that fund. So in that fund, we're making sure we keep it low enough to meet CD's requirements. So we have some equipment purchases we need to make. So we're going to buy food service equipment out of there and go ahead and lower that fund balance to make sure we stay in compliance with the state.
Questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, I still have a question on your explanation. So I get the first part, I get the cash flow, the evening of that out, but then it says, and be it further resolved. That's the questions I have here. It says the funding of incomplete capital reserve.
I apologize.
Oh,
Yeah, I didn't cover that. So we do a lot of capital projects in the summer, obviously, because the children aren't here. Our budget ends on June 30th. So we might start a project in May, and it's not done until August. We are requesting the authority not to stop that project on June 30th, but to go ahead and complete that project that you all have already budgeted for.
perfect.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Ms. Wood?
Mr. Clausen?
Aye.
Mr. Pop?
Aye.
Ms. Phillips?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch?
Yep.
Do we need to spend any more time on review public opinion survey results?
Can we go through it again? if you want to?
I think one time was enough. Next agenda item, facilities planning discussion and consideration of possible ballot measure for November 2018 election. I asked Karen to kind of put together a brief timeline of what has brought us to this point. Karen?
Yes, and I think we talked a little bit about this during our retreat. So in order to, you should have this document in front of you, but I know that one of the things that the board requested was that I provide this overview so that the public had a little bit of background of what all that we did in this process, and it's really been going on for several years. So just as a starting point, the district does, Cheryl and I meet with developers, always have 2 times per year to ensure that the district understands the growth potential. Right now, we're meeting with developers much more frequently. But in 2015, based on the meetings we were having at that time, it became apparent that the district needed to consider some next steps to deal with possible enrollment growth. So then this was discussed with the board in the spring of 2016, and by June of 2016, following an extensive RFP process, RTA was selected, and board members did participate as a part of that committee. RTA was hired to study the district needs and growth. The district then formed a capital facilities committee, which later became the long-term facilities planning committee. It consisted of parent and community members representation from all schools and principal representation from each level. The goals included appropriate communication of the process, opportunities for input, and a process that involved a wide range of the district community. Also included effective evaluation of building capacity, conditions, and alternative programming requirements, as well as effective evaluation of building security and safety with a focus on future security needs. Additionally, a focus on maximizing our learning facilities. RTA completed an assessment of D38 buildings during the summer and early fall of 2016. Findings were presented to the board in the fall of 2016. RTA and the Long-Term Facilities Planning Committee, consisting of 22 people, then met weekly during this winter-spring of 2017 to address the goals noted above and to create a long-term facilities master plan. Additionally, the Long-Range Facilities Planning Committee hosted 3 open houses to gather input and share ideas with the public. RTA presented regular updates to the board in the summer-fall of 2017. The board members determined they preferred to wait to consider the final recommendation from the long-term facilities planning until the newly elected board members were seated.
Okay, will you pause there for a second? I take responsibility for that. One of the reasons why we're kind of behind the 8 ball is I felt it was very important with the election taking place that the new board members had the opportunity to be heard and to voice their opinion. The other option was we would have gotten everything done and approved before they were appointed. So at times I think there's some frustration that we're not further along in the process. So once again, I take responsibility for that.
I don't think you can take it on your own. We probably should have been working on it the year before.
So at a special meeting in January 2018, the Long-Term Facilities Planning Committee provided its best thinking regarding the Long-Range Facilities Master Plan. Though the board appreciated the information of the committee's work, it determined it would be prudent to obtain a second opinion on the RTA work and to determine more exact costs if possible. Board member Chris Taylor directed this initial work and obtained his second opinion from CRP Architects. In February, by directed, I don't mean he told us to do it because only the entire board could tell us to do that. He just served as the liaison. In February 2018, the board approved a long-term facilities master plan presented by RTA and the Long-Range Facilities Planning Committee, and then directed the superintendent to take the foundational steps necessary to pursue a potential ballot measure in November 2018. In April 2018, the board approved the selection of CRP to provide architectural services related to the long-term facilities planning efforts. The CRP staff members toured each site. The meetings were held with principals, maintenance supervisors, and Karen and Cheryl to ensure that all non-essential items were removed from the costing list. Then CRP provided the district more exact costing. Monument Academy also submitted requests for deferred maintenance and safety and security. In addition to best determined growth rates by geographic area per the board's request, the district hired Metro Study in March 2018 to survey developers and provide additional information concerning forecasting growth. Shannon Bingham had previously provided high-level data as a part of the RTA work. The data provided by Metro Study was largely consistent with this data provided through RTA. Metro Study data was presented to the board in May of 2018 and compared with school capacities to ensure maximum use of facilities. The Board of Education and Administration, along with district accountability advisory committees, citizens, parents across the community have been studying the issue for over 2 years. District deliberations and DAC forums have provided input concerning the placement of 6th grade, use of the Grace facility, safety and security needs, and the Bear Creek campus. The board has studied potential options in many meetings over the past 3 months. Tonight, the board has before it options for possible bond and or MLO ballot issues that would provide additional student seating and increase safety and security systems for the students. Additionally, we created a timeline, looked a little like this, and you got this as well, and it outlines 21 board meetings over the past 2 years, plus 3 deliberative engagements, plus 3 public meetings hosted by Long-Range Facilities Planning Committee, and the topics and items discussed in each meeting. So it's a little background.
Thank you, Ms. Broff. Is there any way that we could publish that on board docs?
I think we already have the timeline, and Vicky's planning on adding the background as well.
Perfect, thank you. All right, we'll open it for discussion. Or if anyone wanted to put a motion out there that we could discuss, we could do it that way as well.
I'll try. Last time I tried to do a motion like this, though, I think we had to take a break and, craft it from scratch, so. But I'll try. Is there a proposal here I could work from? Oh, no. All right, let me try this. I want to recommend a motion that School District 38 proceed with a bond measure to build an elementary school at the Jackson Creek site not to exceed $30 million.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, questions, comments, concerns?
I'd like to comment, might turn into questions. I'm hearing an incongruency that there's been over 2 years worth of work, 21 board meetings, community deliberation, input from the administration, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing that we all know eventually we're going to need 2 schools. And I've also heard tonight, give the voters a chance. I've also heard very motivated community members. So there's part of me that's inclined, give the voters a chance and see what they think of 2 schools. But I also understand being fiscally conservative. Hearing that we are 2 years behind, that we were delayed in getting a motion to a ballot last year. I think, are there some, I guess here's my question. There's quantifiable data and there's unquantifiable community engagement and desire to provide for our kids for the future, not just in the short-term future, not just for a year or 2, but a year or 2 is going to go by really fast, and then we're going to be still hurdling. So how do you quantify the unquantifiable? Would be my first question.
Was that rhetorical?
I'd actually wouldn't mind anybody speaking.
I'll try and give you a shot at what I think. I think the school district spent, you want to repeat
My
those
notes?
numbers for me? 21
21 board
and
meetings.
all sorts of community deliberates to try and quantify the unquantifiable. That's what they've done. Now, if you just come back to simple math, and the simple math is there's 900 and some students at Bear Creek. If we build a 650 seat school, and even by moving 6th grade in, which is a 15% roughly reduction, we still have 800 kids in that current Bear Creek district with a school of 650, right? Mm-hmm. That's a problem. However, when we build that 650 seat school, the district as a whole will have excess capacity of about 800. So redistricting may not be pleasant. Many people probably don't want it. It is what it is, right? Now, not everyone will be happy. If we build 2 schools right now, let's just stay with the math of this district. So if I have 800 kids, and if I have 2 schools that has 1,250 or 1,300, excuse me, then I've got 500 seats in the most populous area of excess capacity. And at the growth rate of 100 or 200 students per year, it's going to take us 3-4 years to fill that up. So the question becomes timing. It isn't about what the needs are. And I'm not sure what the unquantifiable is here that would suggest we build 2 schools immediately. I mean, in our last board meeting, we actually had conversation about, let's do a bond for the 2 schools with one half of the bond, if you will, delayed for a couple years, right?
Yeah.
And so there's different ways to approach it. There's no doubt about that. And I'm not sure there's any one person that would have a solution that everyone's going to agree with. So that's the unquantifiable in my mind.
What I can say is you made a proposal that's $500,000 short. So I can't support it. I mean,
Fair enough.
We redistricted our boundaries a few years back, and we did a soft redistrict of boundaries where families had that option, and luckily we are a state of choice where I would, as one board member would assume, that families still have the option to be grandfathered into their preferred building as we are adjusting for changes. We do have MA that would have a capacity as well as we're growing, so that by the time we get to a place where it is a need and we have shown the taxpayers that we have the ability to do what is, that we're fiduciarily responsible while we were moving forward in making sure that we meet the needs of our students.
but MA's at capacity, so how are they going to help us in the next 2 to 3 years?
If they, if they're.
If's the right
Sure,
word.
sure. And if we grow, and if we meet, there's a lot of ifs, there's a lot of if variables here. That's fair.
But you said the statement that Monument Academy could help us
Fair enough,
because they have capacity, and they don't. They're maxed.
fair enough. If they open up their high school and their middle school.
And that's not till
2020.
2020 now.
Mhm.
Mr. Taylor, can I ask a question for clarification? So your motion on the table is just to deal with the new school. So is it your position that you don't want to address any of the safety issues that any of the other structures within the district, or are you anticipating a second motion or addressing that in some other way?
I think I heard 3 questions there. So number
Of
one.
course, I'm an attorney.
Number
Don't
one.
ask questions.
Exactly. Did you or did you not?
Number one is I do care and want to address security. Number 2 is possibly a second motion.
Okay.
And number 3 is possibly some other, I don't know, some other way. But I'm not, I was only talking about this one school building.
Okay.
We can have, if we need to combine bonds or MLOs, I don't care. I was just starting the discussion.
So if we piecemeal this, in other words, kind of the way we've done this is à la carte, look at each piece. In the end, you could make a motion to combine all the bond-related things into one thing if you wanted to. I do want to address Tiffany's question about could we allow soft boundary. First of all, it's important to note that that soft boundering that we did, I don't know if that's a word, but we keep using it that way, was not for very many kids. And it was actually kids that were already choice and open enrolled to go to those schools. So it was, in most cases, just sort of validating the choice they had already made. In the case of Bear Creek, we probably wouldn't be able to grandfather people in and let them stay because it wouldn't solve they'd all choose to stay, and then we wouldn't solve a problem. So it's not likely that we would be able to do, we might be able to do a little bit of that, but not to the level that we would need to help relieve Bear Creek.
Okay.
It would have to be
Matt,
a hard boundary change.
Matt, how much is the safety and security amount? Is it 2.5 million?
Well, we
Cheryl,
we
put it up
floated
there.
a couple different.
That's about right. I wanted to ask you a question, if I might. Would you consider a motion that would include just safety and security in the addition of what you just said?
So, and
that's
the
it.
$500,000 that I was short on. So if it's 2.5 plus 30.5, that'd be 33, right?
Can I read something and tell me if you would consider this motion? And then you could withdraw yours if you like this one?
And just, I just want to draw your attention to Cheryl's got the table up there.
What is that
And so
called?
the bond-related safety and security was 2,157,000.
Okay,
Right, but that's,
That's
you're ignoring
everything.
Monument Academy then.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, you have to include that. I was looking at that as a total.
yeah, so,
It's closer
there's
to
two, yeah,
2.5.
yeah.
yeah, if you include Monument Academy on a prorated basis, you've got 2.5.
Okay, now, you just said a statement, I'm sorry, you stepped on one of my landmines. So finish your statement, and then I want to make the statement.
I'm good.
Okay,
And there's two different MAs, so you wouldn't add them together because there's two different
Just-
ways you could calculate MA.
I want to make this very clear as one board member. I understand by state law that for MLOs, we are required to give Monument Academy their percentage based on their students, and I actually support that. When it comes to bonds, that's based on needs. I will never support just giving a percentage to any school to give them their fair share. Bonds are needs-driven. If MA has a need, then we should fulfill it if it makes sense. It makes no sense in a bond measure to give them any percentage based on any calculation. That's not how it works. So I'm just saying as one board member, if they have a need, and it's up on the screen, and they've proposed it, and I actually reviewed the list, and it seems reasonable to me. So I would be inclined to give it to them. But when I hear this, they get a percentage, I'm going to shut down because that's not right. We want to open a new school. That's one thing we're discussing. We want to do safety and security for all our kids in the district. It makes sense to help Monument Academy to do the same. But they need to understand they can't spend the money any way they want. It has to be spent on these items. And then one school may get more money than another school in our district. It's based on needs, and they all generated a list. We're up around 2.5 million. So I do have a proposal that I think might continue the conversation if that, but I don't want to step on any toes. I don't want to.
My toes don't hurt, so you're good.
Okay. And we could, this might be a starting point that we might be able to get that might help us to get to this. My proposed resolution would read as follows. I move that the D38 Board of Education direct the superintendent to complete the necessary steps for placing a ballot issue on the November 2018 ballot to build an elementary school at the location referred to as the Jackson Creek site, convert Bear Creek Elementary School back into Creekside Middle School, and provide for additional capital improvements for safety and security. This bond will not exceed $33 million, with any additional funds required drawn from the district's reserves with school board approval. So the reason I put that in there is 33 million is pretty conservative. Mm-hmm. It's pretty much right at the 30.5. Well, actually, it's right at the 30.5 and the 2.5. So we're cutting it right on the razor's edge of those two items that we want to do, or I would like to do, which is to build a new school and then harden the safety and security for all the schools in the district. If we go a little bit above that amount because it's so close to the wire, we as a board, and I know when we built Palmer Ridge, I was on the board, we came back and we constantly statused the board. And as it turns out, we had additional funds because we came in under budget. But this would basically tell the community that, hey, we're only asking you for what we absolutely need to do what we think is right. And guess what? If it goes a little above that, we'll use reserves. If we... Well, what part is not good?
Okay, I have a question. On that proposal, because there's two options for MA, which of those
There's two options for what?
MA, which of those two options are you proposing on the spreadsheet?
Well, if it's 2.5 million,
Are you looking at this?
I see that the asterisk, I couldn't figure out, there's a single and a double asterisk on that chart, right? But I didn't find where the asterisk was to explain those two differences.
So I believe you're talking about their actual list,
Right.
which would be the $118,350.
And I went through that list, okay, and it seemed There's nothing unreasonable in their request. So if it's 2.1 million and you're only going to add 118, then I think we actually would be giving you an additional 250,000 above what you're asking for. Is that right?
Yes, that's about right. The total of those items comes to 32.8 million. That's got, if I followed you, the repurpose Bear Creek back to middle, and then the Jackson Creek School at 29.5 million.
Correct.
It's up on the screen.
Correct.
You all can see that.
I went through the whole thing this afternoon.
So, Mr. Taylor, there's not a motion, but a proposal on the table. I'd like your input on that.
Okay, well, I wasn't quite as prepared as Mark, but I think we're in the same place, so.
Do you want to read it if I didn't say
To
it?
amend it?
Can I just express some concern about the language?
Oh,
So
Here
during,
then, here, give it.
yeah, give it to Matt.
oh, no, I
Hey,
don't-
I'm a little surprised that a lawyer has issues with the wordings. This is
my concern is we had the polling data, and the observations were that we use the word, Jackson Creek or Bear Creek. I think maybe we soften the language and say the intent. So, okay.
Get a pen out.
Ms.
If I'm
Upchurch?
not mistaken, a writer will help us with the
Oh, yeah.
ballot language later, correct?
This has nothing to do, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
No, I understand this has nothing to do with the proposal, but I'm saying, and what I'm getting at is it doesn't have to read exactly like that on the
No,
ballot.
no, but it will help the ballot writer.
Okay, gotcha.
If you have words like with the intent.
Okay.
They'll know what you mean.
Okay.
May I also clarify something with you, Mark? And I think I understand, I just want to clarify. The safety and security is for all schools in the district, elementary, middle, and both high schools.
Right, they all generated a list. I'll give one example. I can't ever say vestibule. Did I say that right? Did I say-
Vestibule.
Is that close? So I always like to say man traps, but that gets people all riled. But it's one of the things, these double set of doors with to me, that is just something we need at every school. Some schools already have it. So we wouldn't have to, add it at certain locations. They all came up with their list. The administration has presented the list, and I think we're just saying we're good with the list.
So to piggyback off of Teresa's question, because I actually did have a question, and I hope it's not too nitpicky, but can somebody explain to me why we need bollards? I had to look that up for safety and security, and I support the vestibules completely.
So Dennis could give you an explanation better than I can, but basically it's looking at the perimeter of the building and trying to ensure that there's no easy entrance by perhaps a vehicle or something
That's what
like
I was
that.
thinking.
That's what it's
is that
about.
basically we're putting them in because we don't want vehicles crashing into our buildings.
Or Archer, exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Because when I was looking, I looked at how much the vestibules would cost, and it was around $700,000. And then I was when I was looking at all the safety and security, and I did have one other question. What is the color coding on when you're looking listed each spreadsheet? I don't know what the color coding is. So, for example, let's go to let's see, Prairie Winds. So there's green, purple, blue, and gray. I don't know what that means.
So those were, as we worked through the process, and correct me if I'm wrong because it's been a bit, it was denoting different areas and then different responsibilities of different groups to make sure that work actually happened. Does that sound right? It's been.
Was that Brian's color coding?
Yeah, it was a joint effort. I didn't get to pick the colors, but I kind of helped to sort what goes in which bucket. It was both. So some of the items were flagged by color to identify who was going to track down the costs for those items, and others like safety and security, I believe, were green.
Green,
so that we
yes.
could identify which went into the safety and security bucket as opposed to other costs that would go into a capital maintenance bucket or some other category.
Yep, that answers the
I
question.
think we went to the same kindergarten then.
And I appreciated that because it helped me narrow down, okay, when we're looking at cost, safety and security, constructing a security wall for the pods versus vestibules versus bollards. So, and there's some things in there that I was like, do we really need that? But I also understand the need. Do we need it or do we want it?
Yeah, And Mr. Coates spent the whole day with us, going through and prioritizing with us as well from the safety and security standpoint.
Mr. Taylor, would you like to withdraw your motion?
Please.
Okay.
Is this the only change?
Yep.
I can't imagine. How can you make money as a lawyer and you didn't make that many? All right. Thank you, Mr. Taylor, for withdrawing that. Hopefully this will help the process, which is my only goal here. I would like to make a motion. I move that the D38 Board of Education direct the superintendent to complete the necessary steps for placing a ballot issue on the November 2018 ballot to build an elementary, convert Bear Creek Elementary School back into Creekside Middle School, and provide for additional capital improvements for safety and security. This bond will not exceed $33 million, with any additional funds required drawn from the district's reserves with the school board approval.
I'll second that.
Any questions, comments, concerns?
Can you just break down the 33 million for me one more time? So there's the school.
So it's 29 and a half. I'm being ballpark.
Yeah.
There's no way we can read that, for just so you know. I mean, let's just ballpark, okay? Because it's 29.5 for the new elementary. It's 1 million, just over 1 million, to convert Creekside, or to convert Bear Creek back to Creekside. It's 2.5 million for safety and security. Now remember, these are capital improvements. I did, yes, it's in there. This is not personnel. This is not anything. This is building, well, capital improvements. And I would like to make a statement that before we vote on this, that Teresa, I really value what you said. And to be honest with you, I wish we could, as a board, commit to the fact, because I think it's just so obviously in front of us, that we are going to have to build 2 schools. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. And I hope the community understands that building this elementary is actually getting us back to the capacity that we had, a little bit more than what we used to have. Understand that we decommissioned an elementary that saved us millions of dollars during the recession and basically helped this district ride through that recession. Now we need to start, because of growth, it's come back. I hope the community understands that adding this school only is getting us back basically to where we were. Now it's a little bit bigger, so it's going to be a little bit of an increase. But really, when we build that second school, 2, 3, or whenever it is out in the future, that's going to be the real first additional elementary that we're building in this district. I know that doesn't sound right, but I mean, ultimately, we went down to 1 middle school, which I'll be the first to say is, even back when we made that decision, it didn't sound right, but it did work and save the district millions of dollars. So, and we always said we were going to go back, obviously, to 2 middle schools. So I just wanted to let you know that I actually agree with you. I think the right move is to actually do 2 schools. I just, if we fail, if we ask and fail, we're in no man's land. I mean, we have to show the district and the community that we're being fiscally responsible, and I hope they understand in 2 years, and hopefully we can keep that communication going. They're going to see the additional growth, and in 2 years they'll understand, or whenever that time is, that, hey, we need another school as well.
And Teresa, I too value your comments, and we have had several lengthy conversations about building 1 school immediately, and then getting the bond money passed for both, and kind of kicking the can down the road, and build it when the numbers support it. But my position has changed based on the fact that we need to get a school on board ASAP, and I would be concerned as one board member that we might not be successful if we're asking for a huge sum of money. You know, essentially it'd be more than double.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate that I think everyone here is in agreement. We need to get something going, and hopefully we can do that tonight. But I also, I think the next step, or I would hope as a board we could set in motion some actions and some clarification as to what we are going to be doing the next 18 months. And beyond that, I'm just here for 18 months.
Hopefully a
so-
little bit longer.
But so that we can both get us past where we need to be now in terms of anticipating the future, and also I think it will be a mutual confidence booster for the community to know that we as a board are thinking through the future, thinking through our next steps ahead of where we need to be right now. So I think that's a piece of work that we could.
I think Chris is
do
right there
together.
with you because he's already stated that.
Can I answer that question?
Absolutely.
I think
Mr.
Karen's
Taylor.
ready too as well. But, you know, we've implemented this forecasting process with this new firm. We haven't quite completed that process, but we've done it once. We're going to do it quarter after quarter, or periodically, so we can actually measure reality against the forecast and improve that forecast. So over the next year, we will have a much better data-driven model that will forecast not only where the growth is coming from, but where that school should be. And so that is paramount. And I want to add to that, this data model that we did to drive capacity does include the assumption that Monument Academy builds a high school. If for whatever reason that doesn't come into reality, then our data model will have to be updated by that information as well. So the point I'm making here is we're going to have to address it every quarter in my mind. It just needs to be an ongoing process, because I don't discount Karen's she stated several months ago that we might have a tsunami of growth. Well, when I look around, she may absolutely be correct. And if that happens quickly and we're not monitoring it, we'd be in trouble really quick. So I think everybody understands your concern. I think everyone here has probably been on both sides of this fence, and we just finally said, let's get this done. Let's get onto, you know, a level playing ground, if you will, and then watch the data so that we can then plan when and where that next school is. And some of the assumptions become reality, and so our model becomes better.
And the only thing I would add is, I was going to say some of kind of what Chris was saying, but also this is definitely an ongoing process, and not only do we, so we move forward in August and we choose what our ballot language is, then there's the next step of, so we've got to figure out how to manage the growth that we do have before, you know, regardless of what happens in November. Then November happens, then we've got to make a plan based on what happens in November. And then we've got to, this will be our life for a while, is the best way to put it. Is constantly trying to stay ahead of, you know, the equivalent is, I feel like, you know, Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner or something, you know, that it's coming, you know, the thing is coming, and I've just got to run fast enough to get ahead of it. And I think we're all going to be in that boat, so.
Yeah, no, it necessarily needs to be in the forefront, just so that we can provide for our kids.
Wonderful comments, Ms. Phillips. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
I have a point of clarification I'd like to ask.
Yes, ma'am.
I can't remember, does Palmer Lake Elementary School, is it ADA accessible? Does it for wheelchairs?
It does not have an elevator. It's got multiple flights of stairs in it. So under current code, it would not meet current code. Brian can tell you more about that if you'd like.
Yeah, that's correct. The sort of the internal circulation of the building is not compliant with the codes that would apply by today's standards. Obviously, when it was built, it was in compliance, but ADA was enacted after that.
And that's why we're asking for, that's why, not we, that's why it's on there, the 45,000 for a lift for, the lift for the stairs, correct?
Correct.
Is there a way we can address that? If it's not on here? On here? 'Cause that seems important to me. Maybe that's a pet thing of mine, but if it's not, we're not code compliant and we're not meeting the needs of our ADA students, that's not acceptable for me.
Well, we can definitely, as a board, have a conversation to do it and take it out of reserves. And
We're at $45,000 out of capital reserve that we discussed earlier.
Okay.
Mr. Taylor?
I do have one more question, and it's only because I discovered one more document in here that I hadn't paid enough attention to, apparently. 6A, Monument Academy dialogue back and forth here between Cheryl and Dawn.
Yeah, they did have some additional requests that they came back with. So beyond, but that's for, that's not safety and security related. That was deferred maintenance related.
Well, but then there was even more because,
And actually construction related. So.
yeah, and I hadn't, this is kind of like, where'd this come from?
It just,
Can I spell out what the request is? I mean,
you absolutely can, and I'll just tell you how it came to be. We were just verifying that we had, with them, that they felt like we had met the state requirement and to include, and they verified back, yes, you have met the state requirement to include us in conversations around this. And based on a conversation we had with our board last night, we want to amend our original request, and then these things came through. The one thing I do have to clarify here is there are some requests for things that may or may not be allowable by law because of how bonds work versus MLOs.
well, then I don't need to bring it up. If
Yeah.
I'll leave it to you, but I was kind of surprised when I actually read through this and saw what the request was.
Well, and here's the other thing is based on how, if MA does in fact own their own property, it limits what we are able to fund for a lot of different reasons, because anything we fund with a bond that's piggyback on our bond, we have to be able to take possession of should Monument Academy basically stop operating.
And I liked the lease, but that's all changed. So based on what I know today, this was a little bit surprising, and we hadn't talked about it. So and the
And
reason
it was new, yeah.
The reason apparently is that you're not convinced that legally we can even do that,
Or that we would, our fiscal responsibility to our voters would be protected because we have to be able to regain back anything that's capital improvements. For instance, if we were to improve the utilities on property, we would never be able to regain that back
right?
as just that piece because it's integral to the
And
land.
even they suggested that was a problem, and suggested that an MLO might be more appropriate. So I'll just, what they're asking for, if I read this right, is $5 million. That's their amended request, $5 million. They've articulated to some degree what you've said about the difficulties of that being in our bond, and then open the door for an MLO possibility. And the question is again, should we let the voters decide that as a separate MLO that we put forth?
It would
I just
be,
wanna
yeah, it
raise
would be
that
more
question.
appropriate for it to be in an MLO. Some of those things would be absolutely more appropriate in an MLO, especially if they are in fact seeking funding through the Ed Authority, because that's a completely different ballgame and there's specific rules regarding that.
And I'm a big believer in school choice, and it's a public school, and if I understand it, and it sounds like you're way ahead of where I'm at, but should we consider an MLO for that purpose? It's separate from this bond.
But, okay,
Just a question.
we don't MLO for them. or bond for them. They do it on, they should come to us if they want to do this.
Well, that's what I thought they've done.
Well, we would actually include, because there is a requirement now to
No, I
include
understand
them.
that, but
Yeah.
if they wanted, if they have something that they want to do, and then they need to come to us and say, we have a need, we would like to do a bond, and then they actually come here, if I remember right, Cheryl, because they did it years ago, then they ask us to approve their initiative. But they haven't done that. So that's really, that's in their court.
And you're probably entirely right, I don't know. I just read this. I haven't even had a chance to really consider what it means. But it does appear that, as Karen said, it's more appropriate in an MLO. So if I understand right, then this is interesting, but in order for us to move forward in any way, shape, or form, they need to be formal, have a formal meeting request or something, or?
If they want to do a separate bond or MLO, yes. They come to us
That's
and,
essentially what I think I'm reading, but am I
Yeah,
reading it right?
and they
Karen?
are, I think they really, I think their intent, although this just came in, so I'm making an assumption about this, and is that they want to make sure that they have voiced what they believe they need, but they're also saying, we know some of these aren't appropriate in a bond, but this is what we need in order to feel like we have an adequate facility.
So we're in no way, shape, or form prepared to act on it. Is that fair?
You definitely could ask us to research it a little bit further. We did some preliminary research into the legal aspects of it and got some of that information about where we run into a problem as a district, because if at any point in time MA defaults, depending on what we've done, we might not have any claim to anything that we've provided money for.
Understand. It would have been a lot better if it had been a lease situation, but it's not that, so we have to deal with what it is. I don't know what to say. I mean, I just, I raised the question, so I'll let you guys decide. I have no axe to grind here. I was just
Well,
acknowledging that it was there.
and I think if all we're adding is safety and security, that is
that's
addressed
separate.
in their old list.
That's totally
And
separate.
if we're not talking about capital improvements on any of the other schools, to some degree, these are capital improvements as well, so.
So with that being said, Mr.
just
Prof.
one last thing, and it's not, I just want to make sure, Karen, I know you may not be, do you see any issues with this? Before we step forward as a board to vote on this, is there any comments that you'd like to make to us on any concerns you have, or?
I still have one question. With the 2.5 million you mentioned about safety and security, so that is, I just want to clarify, because I have safety and security 2.157 for all the schools except MA, and then if you add MA's list of 118,000, you don't quite get to 2.5, so tell me a little bit more about where you get the 2.5.
We're giving you a little extra.
Okay, just want to make sure.
I mean,
Rounding.
that's, what?
You're rounding.
Well,
I'm rounding
the
is
issue
correct.
that Tiffany brings up sounds like safety and security for those who are disabled. So to me, that
It
could
could
fit
go-
in there.
Okay.
So then you'll come back and,
Okay. Well, we would bring a proposal. I just want to make
Right.
sure that I'm catching what your numbers were on that. And I understand the not to exceed $33 million.
and it may be that maybe there's an expense more on the building. I mean, and I think every board member understands that we're saying for these two items, the max is 33 million.
Right, and who knows, that we could go out in a year to do the safety and security items we had on the list, and
They've gone
and
up.
things have, or the contractor costs have gone up. All those things are likely.
We ready to vote? Ms. Wood?
Mr. Clausen?
Aye.
Mr. Pop?
Aye.
Ms. Phillips?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch? Aye.
I need that piece of paper back. I'll give it to you at the end. I will give you that sheet of paper at the end.
They have it in the MLO
Or I'll rip it in half right now and give you
That's the reason why.
and I'll give you the other half.
All right, next item, mill levy override. Would anyone like to make a motion or make a proposal?
Just stand by. And again, this is just a starting point to help the conversation. I would like to make a motion. I move that the D38 Board of Education direct the superintendent to complete the necessary steps to place a mill levy override on the November 2018 ballot in the amount not to exceed $1 million to provide for additional personnel, training, and equipment for the purpose of enhancing security and wellness assessments in all publicly funded schools associated with D38. Might as well pass that down.
You wanted,
Is there a second?
I have a question, I'm sorry.
Well,
you could second it to get a question.
Okay, I'll second, but I have a question.
sure.
Does publicly funded exclude?
No,
Okay, thank you.
no, by no
All right,
means.
we're good.
By no means. That, in fact, that verbiage was very clear to include
Okay. we're good.
all schools within the district. It may not be the best worded statement.
Any questions, comments, concerns?
And we would come back with a proposal as to how we would allocate that. Okay.
Ms. Wood?
Mr. Clausen.
Aye.
Mr. Pop.
Aye.
Ms. Phillips.
Aye.
Mr. Taylor.
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
No.
Oh, wait a minute. We just voted on that, but I did not,
You didn't make an official motion, or did you?
okay. We've already voted on it, so we have a little bit of an issue. I would like to make a motion that we amend that to sunset it in 7 years. I did not have it in there, I apologize. I don't know how that fell out, because that verbiage is not in that. So I don't know the exact right way to do this,
I think you just vote to amend it.
so I would like to make a motion that we amend that. I mean, I'm sorry, I apologize for letting that,
That the last sentence would read,
and it would sunset in 7 years.
I will second that, Mr. Poff. Questions, comments, concerns? Ms. Wood?
Mr. Clausen.
Aye.
Mr. Pop.
Aye.
Ms. Phillips.
Aye.
Mr. Taylor.
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
Still no.
All right, are we ready to move on to?
Can I just want to make a statement, and I'm kind of backtracking a little bit. And I just want to make this statement, and if no one wants to discuss it, we can move forward. I have a little bit of an issue just about if someone intends, and I'm not picking on you, and because it happened earlier in this meeting too, I personally, as one board member, if you think you're going to vote no on something, I really would like to hear the reason why ahead of time. I mean, it happened earlier on the budget vote, and you don't have to, but it just, for me personally, as one board member, to not explain what issues you have and then just to say no to something, I think we owe each other and a board, and it's just me talking.
Hang on, pause for a second. Mr. Rahe, I would just respectfully request that you keep your comments to yourself during the pendency of the board meeting. Sorry for interrupting.
And it's just the courtesy of, I would like to understand, because you might persuade me to change my mind. I mean, that's really what this is about. It is deliberation or collaboration. I want to understand everybody's concerns if we're about to make a bad decision and there's something that somebody would like to change. I really would like to address it. And then instead of, does that make sense, or am I crazy here?
I don't have a problem addressing it.
Yeah.
Because I thought I addressed it earlier. I had a couple concerns. I just felt like, one, based on the polling, I do have concerns about putting an MLO and a bond on the ballot. B, I don't feel that there's still too many unanswered questions, and the discussion, we need to get moving and get going on this now. And I felt like the MLO discussion, we just started talking about this a few months ago, and that hasn't had a good enough, in my mind, development in the conversation and in the understanding. So.
And those are legitimate concerns, quite frankly. I was kind of vacillating. I support the safety of our kids, but for me it's a fine line. If we go to the voters with a MLO and a bond, or we're going to get one or the other, and that's a legitimate concern.
And see, I agree completely. And a lot of that shows that we need to educate the community to understand that a bond is for bricks and mortar, and that an MLO is for personnel, training, that kind of stuff. So I think the discussion around that about educating the community better so they understand the differences between the two. But I actually have exactly the same concern, is that are we risking, by putting them both out there, are we risking that someone's just gonna, well, they're asking for money everywhere, no down the line. I agree completely.
Okay, all valid concerns, and that's a wonderful point. And I've been the loser of a 4-1 vote a few times, and we discuss it, we vote, and we kind of move on. So,
and I think it's about valuing everybody's opinions, because Teresa, you did the same thing, and I'm so proud. I don't want to say proud, but your first board meeting, and you made it very clear how you felt. And that's really what being on a board is about, that you should feel comfortable that you can be that one person. And I've lost votes 4-1, and I didn't get upset.
I'm not upset.
No, I mean, it's about, just moving forward, but I want to hear those concerns, and I appreciate that you're willing to state those, because they are very valid.
right,
Can we amend that one more time?
And actually, I would just like to say it's helpful to hear it from our perspective, because what you just shared, Tiffany, too, helps us understand what we need to do in terms of education. So.
In all seriousness, the federal government is talking about funding safety and security, and frankly, if they do, I'd like to withdraw the MLO. So, we should maybe, you put a 7-year sunset, we might want to include language that says if the federal government funds this same activity, if you will, then we will terminate the MLO.
That's a great statement, and I actually, in my original one, I took it out because I didn't want to be too lengthy. I actually had in there that the school board would annually review, I wanted to say, the expenditures and the results to determine whether this program should continue. Because I agree with you 100%. Now, we can't commit for future school boards. If they decide they're just going to do both, then, so be it. We can't put like a time bomb in there, if the feds do, But I think we could put some verbiage if you could come up with the right, and I support that completely. But that might actually be something we actually want to put in the MLO verbiage itself. Can we, Cheryl, do you know if we can do that?
I believe you can. Well, though obviously everything will go back through bond council. And as you know, and you just stated it yourself, the board every December has the right to say we're going to levy this or we're not going to levy this with
That's
an
right.
MLO.
That's absolutely, I forgot about that. So every December, we could make the decision that if the feds have kicked in, that board at that time could make that. But I think what you want to do, Chris, is you kind of want to put that statement in there that,
Well, I think it helps it pass, frankly,
well, making it sunset is going to help.
The only thing the challenge is if they put it, I think we have to be more specific than if they put something in place to fund similar things, because it may not be.
Right. They may tell us how we have to spend it.
Yeah, so what is similar? I mean, because I don't want to get in a
Speaking to
situation
the
where we're making
specificity
a
of it.
decision about whether this is similar or slightly different or.
It's
But-
problematic to anticipate the future.
I think Cheryl and Mark hit it right. It's each December when we approve the mill levies, we review it.
We're approving this for a specific intent, and if the intent is or the need is no longer there, then we don't take the money.
So I'm going to pass that back.
right, are we ready to move on?
I'm sorry, Matt, I apologize.
Right.
We're good.
You're fine.
I'd just like to make one more comment to address one of Tiffany's concerns. I come from the demographic of having been here since 2006, and even though in the polling data, which indicated that I think roughly half of the families have been here 5 years or less, I think there is a pretty strong recent memory of that bond passing and that MLO not passing. So I think it's worth putting both on the ballot.
Thank you. All right, facilities signage, safety and security. Mr. Coates, is that you?
You guys, excuse me, I had some dental work done today, so if I drooling.
Yeah, kind of noticed you over there.
Did you get hit with a golf ball?
No, we didn't hit it that far. You guys tasked me last meeting with coming up with some signage in reference to the gun-free zones, and this was had a lot of different processes we went through. Some very wordy, some asterisks being a little more defined. Ended up coming up with this as a kind of a universal. Just, I think this meets the needs that I heard from you guys during last meeting of what you would like to see in signage at our schools now that we're adding armed employees. Comments, questions?
I like it.
Yeah, one of the things, Dennis and I actually got together during our routine monthly. So I think the intention is now, Dennis, that we're going to leave up the original signs, the gun-free zones, because that's a federal law, state law and everything. So this would like be right next to it, above it, below it, or somehow.
Correct. And the one thing that, and it was addressed earlier tonight, and Karen did it much more articulately than I could, but the one information that I want to share out there is whether those gun-free zone signs are up, down, backwards, on the ground, in the air, it is illegal for anybody that is not authorized by the district or law enforcement to enter school grounds with a weapon. That this sign has nothing to do with federal law. It is simply one more reminder for somebody that's thinking about making a poor choice not to.
This is
Thank you.
a most recent one, not,
Right.
not what is in board docs
Okay,
from like
so
last
we
week.
should be looking up here.
Yes,
Okay.
please, yeah.
That was gonna be my question, thank you. Yes, he has modified
It's
this over the days.
Yeah, it's a lot of thought has went into this, and I think this is what fits District 38 the best, in my opinion.
And where would these be posted and
These
how
would
many?
be entranceways onto school property and front door entrances into the building.
The only suggestion I would give is the sentence, "Our schools have armed security," make that bigger.
Okay.
That's the only, I mean, it's fine the way it is. You know, just kind of, not as big as attention, but, because, you know, some of those signs are in entryways where people are driving by. Or, you know, or they might see it. I want everybody to see that.
Yeah, and we can, you know, a discussion, and I haven't mentioned this to Cheryl or Karen, but that's sure something we can put on our flashing signage too, or at least consider it with your approval. But no, we certainly not trying to keep it a secret from the public.
So does, using the word security, does that still cover the discussion, the
Yes,
clarification?
because according to, and Dennis might want to elaborate on that, but according to the way it's described in statute and in our insurance policy is anytime you have been given the authority to carry a gun on school property, you are you've been authorized to act as a security officer.
Correct. Our insurance pool is very clear on what the titles of anybody who is authorized, and security is one of the titles that would have to be in their position.
Karen, I have a couple questions. So school zones are also drug-free, correct? And there's legal consequences there. The whole concept of gun-free is similar to that, right? I mean, some kids have a prescription drug they have to bring and it's okay, and nurses help them or whatever. But
Right.
conceptually, has drug-free zones helped?
In other words, are you wondering, has it been a deterrent? I would say that kids are still making poor choices in some cases. And obviously the drug-free zone is more for illegal or illegally carrying drugs, or whether it's even if it's prescription medication. But I wouldn't say it's been a huge deterrent, but I'll let Mr. Coates answer that.
I think back in the day when it was developed, it probably, living in Colorado with legalized marijuana puts a little different spin on that conversation in my mind. I think that with most kids that do make faulty choices, the more times they can hear it's illegal, the more times they can hear about the consequences that they may be facing, the more that may help them to make better decisions.
So if I had a concealed carry permit and I went to a high school football game or basketball game or anything
You
at
would
a
spend
school
the
zone,
night at CJC.
I would be arrested,
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah, it doesn't mean that kids may not make poor choices with regard to the drug-free zone, but I would hope the deterrent becomes the consequence.
Yeah, it's a sad commentary, the state of affairs we live in, where, in most cases where these tragedies occur, somebody's noticed or seen something and sometimes even reported it, and it still is not taken care of. I understand what we're doing, and I want our schools to be secure and safe. I don't know that the school system has the capability to fix what ails our society in this regard, but we can't ignore it because it's a sad reality that we live in.
No, and if we have to do 1,000 things, this is one of 1,000. We'll keep doing what we have to do.
I'd like to speak to a couple of things. Was this developed as a deterrent?
That would be one of the factors.
So the other component that I think comes into play is how kids who don't need deterrence perceive this when they walk into a building. So I could see some kids walking in and seeing this and thinking that they feel more safe. And on the other hand, I could see a population of students walking in feeling unnerved by this, much as just our general parental staff population might feel as well. Security decisions, and I'm going back to something Karen mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, I think it was this meeting, that security decisions are based on best practices. Is there any data? Are there?
That's a great question.
It's situational, but being somewhat data-driven myself, how do we know this helps?
I can't show you specific data today to answer your question. I know that it is becoming more and more common throughout the country to change the signage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, it's one more reminder not to your point about the elementary teachers, or I was assuming elementary could be middle and high school
I'm actually
kids.
talking about even high school, how.
I remember, you know, and that's a great question, and I'll certainly think more about that. I think when I was in school, if a police officer walked into school, everybody would have been talking about it. We have one in our high schools and buildings every day. So I think their mindset, and you made a thoughtful comment earlier about giving our, you know, the kids credit. That would be one where I would say to them, they're used to seeing, you know, we have a SRO at each high school, other police officers will stop by, and kids don't even acknowledge. I mean, to them, if there are kids, then we need to find a way to make sure that we're addressing and communicating with them.
And the other thing I would add is that one of the roles of whether they're SROs or armed security, in many of the other districts that already have armed security, is to build relationships. That's one of the most important roles they have, is to build relationships with students, because that allows students to feel more comfortable with that. Plus, it also allows students to feel more comfortable bringing up concerns or issues to that individual. Unfortunately, back to what Chris said, our kids now recognize that this is a reality. None of them are coming into school and being surprised that they're doing lockdown drills. They're doing, and it's extremely unfortunate, but that is the reality now.
Yeah.
And so for most of our kids, you're right, it could go either way, but I think our kids are beginning to face that this is part of their life in high school. It's sad, but that is what they enter the building recognizing. Now, fortunately, there's so many positive things happening in the school building that they come in and they say, you know, this is my world and this is the fun. I get to see my kids, I get to go interact with my teachers, I get these great classes. So that predominantly becomes what they think about. But to say that they're probably not thinking about these things in the back of their mind, in the reality of our world today, they probably are. And so how they might view this is probably based on what it is, what's their framework of what they need to feel safe.
And to Karen's point about the relationships, as we get ready to do interviews for these positions, and I talk, you know, I've said the expression that they have to be the right people. For me, the comment I you know, I was the SRO here in the district for 9 years, and one of the best comments I could get was, hey, you're pretty cool for a cop. My goal is to find people that are pretty cool for armed security.
Right. And then just following up on that, because I'm aware of all the chatter the last week, for lack of a better term, I don't want to diminish anybody's opinions or anything, but in terms of a concealed weapon on a staff member in a school, I think that's another step that, and speaking of the framework of the child or whoever is perceiving that, again, it could make one child feel more safe. It could make another child be looking around wondering, who is that person? Are they here today? Or those types of questions. And so I think that's something we need to consider going forward.
There hasn't been a day gone by in months I haven't thought about and considered what's going to be best for us as we move forward.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I look forward to hearing more from you.
I have a follow-on question for Teresa's comments, and this, again, Karen, is probably to you. So, and this is not from on social media, but I have this question, and is most of these incidents at gun-free zones across the country?
Oh, yes, because every school is gun-free zone.
So in essence, the purpose here is to deter an assailant. Isn't that what we're really doing? Because generally speaking, I believe that's the case, is it's usually in a gun-free.
It's one more reminder,
right,
to make a good choice. And not only, I mean, for adults too. You know, we're tasked, you know, through Claire Davis and a lot of things, other different, to protect everybody. I mean, not just students, but staff, visitors. You know, we get a basketball game, you know, and I saw you at a few of them. You know, we got Lewis Palmer Widefield at the buzzer with a couple thousand people. I wouldn't have minded some help.
Probably a lot of help.
Nor the parents.
You know, it's okay not to be comfortable having this conversation. You know, Dennis and I both worked patrol years ago, and, you know, there's a lot of scenarios that we were in that are just not good scenarios, and you never want to think about them. And here's the bottom line. We do fire drills all the time. There hasn't been a kid lost to a fire in 50 years. You know, but we still do fire drills. You know, we need to be ready, and if it makes, unfortunately, we should be uncomfortable having this conversation. But it's just like talking to your kids about drugs, you know, things like that. These are not comfortable conversations.
No, and you know, yesterday I took my son and daughter to the Sky Sox game, and obviously I'm a little more aware of, I'm always aware of my surroundings, but yesterday I'm noticing, you know, people in uniforms without a gun, people in uniforms with a gun, people who I was pretty sure weren't in any kind of uniform, but were carrying. And I'm trusting minor league baseball in the Colorado Springs Sky Sox to have appropriate safety there for me. And I don't, you know, I'm trusting that, and I'll continue to work here to make the community trust in what we're doing.
And I said, I'd appreciate that. And I remember, I said it at the last meeting, that the unknown factor is a deterrent within itself of not knowing who. And so that is a deterrent.
Yeah, my concern as a parent is just the unknown factor as a deterrent can also be a factor for a positive learning environment.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, the first day of school, I mean, to me, this is a daily, you know, are we doing what's best? Can we, do we need to adapt and adjust as we move forward, as our clientele here in the district changes, as the world changes? You know, maybe that's something I anticipate constantly reviewing.
Are there any additional questions for Mr. Coates? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to the next agenda item.
No.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the resolution regarding the distribution of mill levy override fund to Monument Academy Charter School in accordance with House Bill HB 17-1375 as presented.
I'll second.
Any questions, comments, concerns?
I'm just curious, why are we doing this? I thought it was contractual.
It is, but the state law still required that we have a plan that mirrors whatever we have contractually in place
No comment then.
by the end of June.
Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns? Ms. Wood?
Mr. Clausen?
Aye.
Mr. Pop?
Aye.
Ms. Phillips?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch?
Aye.
All right, I would like to make a motion for the next agenda item to declare the board's intention to participate in the general election on November 6, 2018, to appoint Vicki Wood as a district designated election official for this election, and to direct Ms. Wood to notify the county clerk and recorder of the board's intention to appear on the ballot.
Second? Ooh, we got to give it to her.
We'll give it to Ms. Upchurch. Questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none. Ms. Wood?
Mr. Clausen?
Aye.
Mr. Pop?
Aye.
Ms. Phillips?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch?
Aye.
Can I make a motion?
Sure.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the revisions to policy JRA/JRC, student records / release of information on students as presented.
Second.
Questions, comments, concerns? Ms. Wood?
Mr. Clausen?
Aye.
Mr. Pop?
Aye.
Ms. Phillips?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch? Aye.
All right, we now have the monthly dashboard. Anything that we need to be concerned about?
No, and I gave a narrative in the consent agenda with some additional information.
Wonderful narrative. Questions, comments, concerns for Ms. Wongabin? All right, moving on to the next agenda item, the assessment dashboard. Ms. Benton? Excuse me, Dr. Benton.
Thank you. See if I can find it on here. There we go.
If you hover, yeah.
Thank you. Any questions pertaining to the data presented in the assessment dashboard?
Yes.
Great.
Number one is I appreciate the data. Number two is, why is it that almost across every grade, it's only the well below that change much? I mean, there seems to be a lot of improvement across the well below between beginning, mid, and end, but the others are sort of just a result of that change.
So you're asking why is the red decreasing? So there is a great deal of intervention that occurs for well below. So in order for a student to qualify as well below, they basically have to score significantly below grade level. We then put interventions in place for them. And so that's where the state dollars are actually required to go for that intervention.
So it's targeted remedial.
It's what we consider intensive intervention. So a lot of that's actually the word. And there are READ dollars attached to students who qualify at the end in that red category. So they're basically funds from the state that allow us to supplement some of the intervention that we're doing.
So then what about the green or the yellow, right?
So the green are
They don't get quite, that's not intense there, right? It's
right, the yellow get what we call targeted.
targeted. So red is intense, yellow's targeted, what's green?
Grade level.
Grade level.
It's called universal instruction.
And blue is nothing because they're grade already.
They're all also getting basically what we consider universal. So that's general education support, and some of them are also students who are gifted, so they get additional support that way.
Interesting.
Any other questions for Dr. Benton? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions.
Okay, next agenda item, audit firm financial engagement letter.
That's for information only. It's the annual audit engagement letter. Wanted to make sure that you all had it and had it in your packet.
Perfect.
I think we're at a point to make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I believe we are.
Second.
Questions, comments, concerns?
I did have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
If you don't mind me pulling out the Colorado Department of Education IDEA funding eligibility certification.
If you wouldn't mind, we'll just leave it in there and
Okay.
we could talk about it.
Sure.
If that works for you.
That works for me,
All
because
right.
it's just a question.
Perfect.
My only question was, I was wondering if you could clarify and explain it. This is a new document, I don't know, I'm learning still. When it says level of maintenance versus budgeted amount versus total budget, is that set forth by us or federal or state?
So, according to federal law, which is made sure that compliance is ensured by the state of Colorado, we have to assure to the state that we're going to spend at least as much on special education on basically a per student basis in the following year as we are in the current year. There are some exceptions. For example, if we had a lot of retirees of very expensive special ed teachers, but they're monitoring to make sure that we maintain our efforts towards our special needs, exceptional needs students.
Okay.
And this is compliance with that, which requires board approval.
Okay, I just didn't, like I said, and the numbers aren't that different. I was just curious if that was our that we decided on that budget, and if that's pretty fluid, if it's fluid or pretty standard, and so.
It is our budget. We are seeing very large increases in special
Yes.
needs spending. And
Right.
this year, you especially see that.
Yeah, okay. That was the only question I had, just clarification.
Wonderful question, thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Just a comment, that is the budget items requiring board signature, 89% of that is budget, open POs for the upcoming school year. I just wanted to point that out, those are not current expenditures. Correct, Cheryl?
Correct.
All right. Are we ready to get, all right, Ms. Wood?
Thought we already took that motion, but I'm sorry. Mr. Clausen.
Aye.
Mr. Pop.
Aye.
Ms. Phillips.
Aye.
Mr. Taylor.
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
Aye.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to convene an executive session pursuant to CRS 246402 subsection 4A concerning the potential lease or sale of real property.
Second.
Questions, comments, concerns? Ms. Wood?
Mr. Clausen.
Aye.
Mr. Pop.
Aye.
Ms. Phillips.
Aye.
Mr. Taylor.
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch.
All right, and if we could all adjourn to the Oval Office,